This video is a brief introduction to the sense of taste, or what's also known as gustation. The sense of taste is actually 75% smell, believe it or not. And this is something that we all kind of intuitively figured out as children. Because if your mom told you you can't have dessert unless you eat X food that you don't like, what you would do is plug your nose, eat some of that food so that you could get your dessert, right? And the reason for that is if you can't smell something, you're not able to taste it well, again, because gustation is about 75% the sense of smell and your ability to smell. We all know that you taste with your tongue. And so what I want to do now is talk a little bit about the anatomy, the actual structures associated with the tongue that house the gustatory organs or the taste buds, what allows you to actually be able to taste. Most of the taste buds in our body are located within projections on the tongue that are known as papillae. However, we also have some taste buds on the cheeks of the mouth. We have them on the epiglottis down deeper in the throat, and there have recently been some discovered actually in the lungs as well. But by and large, most of these taste buds, most of these organs that allow us to be able to taste are located again on these projections within the tongue that are referred to as papillae. And there are a few different types of papillae on your tongue that you should be aware of. So the first of these are what are known as circumvallate papillae. If you look here where my pointer is pointing, we've got this kind of upside down V, if you will, of raised projections on the tongue. So these are located just on the most posterior part of the tongue. If you were to look in your mirror and stick your tongue out as far as you possibly could, you'd likely be able to see these. These are probably the largest taste buds. They're kind of mushroom shaped, and they are known as circumvallate papillae. Most of the surface of the tongue is covered by much smaller projections, which are known as fungiform papillae. We have some foliate papillae on the posterior lateral aspect of the tongue. So you can see some of these here. They're just kind of slits or grooves that run along the side. Some of these foliate papillae over here as well. And then we have one last type of papillae, which is known as a filiform papillae. And they're not shown on this tongue diagram because they're actually microscopic. However, if you look at this actual microscope side of a tongue here, you can see some of these filiform papillae. So we have these on our tongues as humans. Other mammals have them as well. If you've ever been licked by a cat, you know it has that really kind of Velcro texture that kind of sticks to your skin and pulls on your skin as you're being licked by a cat. And the reason for this is cats have a very high density of these filiform papillae. So if you were to look at a cat's tongue, I'm going to draw a little representation here. Here's the tongue. I'm going to draw these filiform papillae much larger than they actually are. They're actually microscopic, but they tend to have this kind of pointed into them. And this pointed in tends to kind of point backwards. And that's why when a cat licks you, it really kind of sticks to your skin. These little microscopic filiform papillae that point backwards into the cat's mouth grab your skin and kind of give that Velcro texture to the cat's tongue. So we've talked about where you would find these taste buds, that they're associated with these papillae or these projections that are located on the tongue. What I want to do now is talk a little bit more about the structure of these taste buds so that we can start to understand how they actually work. So if we were to take this little boxed out area of tongue and magnify it much more highly, what we would see is something that looks like this picture over here. So here's one of those papillae, and you'll notice that there's some grooves associated with this projection or with this papillae from the tongue. So we've got these grooves here, and these grooves are lined by these little purple dots that you can see the artist has drawn in. And each one of these little purple dots is a taste bud. So if we were to take this area of the groove that's lined with these taste buds, this little boxed out area here, and magnify it more highly under a microscope, what we might see is a structure that looks kind of like this. So I want to talk about what this is for a minute. This right here is a taste bud. So here's an adjacent taste bud over here. There's another adjacent taste bud right here. And the structure of taste buds is somewhat similar to the olfactory epithelium that we saw in the nose. So the taste cells are these little neurons that you're seeing represented in yellow. And these, of course, feed back together into the cranial nerve that's taking sensations on taste. If you look at the dendritic end of these taste cells, so these neurons that are picking up tastes, they are kind of branched off into taste cilia or taste hairs. So they've got those little cilia-like extensions or hair-like extensions on their dendritic end that we saw with the chemoreceptors in the nose as well. This is where taste molecules are going to actually bind. And you'll notice that most of the taste bud is kind of covered in this protective casing of other cells. There's a little place where that protective casing opens up, which is known as a taste pore, and the dendritic end of the taste cell extends through this taste pore so that it can bind to chemicals that are dissolved in saliva within the mouth. You see the basal cells that we have in the nose as well. So these are stem cells. They're going to replace these taste cells when and if they're damaged. So we've all, I'm sure, had the experience of drinking something or eating something that maybe was a little bit too hot. Maybe you took a sip of coffee or hot chocolate, or bit into a food that was way too hot and it really burned the tongue. And you'll probably notice that following that, for a week to 10 days, you've got an area of your tongue that just can't taste. And the reason for that is when we eat really hot foods, spicy foods, other types of foods, sometimes we can damage these taste cells and cause them to die off. So it's important that we have basal cells associated with each taste bud that are capable of replacing taste cells that have become worn out, that have become damaged, and are no longer functioning. So we see basal cells associated with the taste buds. We also see supporting cells, just like we saw with the olfactory epithelium in the nose. So they're kind of interspersed with these neurons, and they're there to cushion and protect and, again, ensure that these neurons are functioning optimally. Taste cells are activated in a manner that's very similar to the olfactory cells of the nose. So they are chemoreceptors. You have to have food molecules dissolved in saliva to be able to activate these taste cells. The other thing is, just like what we saw with the nose, we are capable as humans of differentiating about 10,000 different tastes. And the way that it's thought that we do this is very similar to the way that we differentiate smells. So different tastes would bind to different proteins on these cilia, on these dendritic ends of the hair cells, and based on what proteins are bound, you get a slightly different pattern of electrical signals that's moving away from the tongue towards the gustatory cortex of the brain, where that particular pattern of signals is interpreted as a particular taste sensation.